Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Dr. Ruth Goodwin-Groen, the Managing Director of the Better Than Cash Alliance, and we're thrilled that you're with us today to discuss the World Food Programme's e-payments program in Kenya. And thanks first to the UK Department for International Development for making this possible. They funded the case study research and also the Consultative Group to Assist the Poor, who was managing this work. And of course, we have thanks to our members of the Better Than Cash Alliance, the Government of Kenya, MasterCard, and the World Food Programme. So we're thrilled to have this webinar today with our members. If you would like to download the actual highlights, the long version, it's on the Better Than Cash Alliance website, which is betterthancash.org. If for any reason that you can't follow along the whole time, it's right there. But the webinar will also be highlighting some new and interesting facts, so it's not all in the case study. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have Cheryl Harrison, who's head of the innovations team at the World Food Programme in Kenya, and she's been doing that for the last 3 years and is behind the great innovations that they've been doing there. Many of you will have heard of the refugee program at Dadaab, and so you know that it's the most challenging circumstances that they're working in. Cheryl, we're really excited to hear about what you've been achieving in Kenya. Marc van Puyvelde is a veteran of the payment systems industry and has been working with MasterCard and WFP in their innovation in this area. He has also worked specifically in Kenya, and he's going to come in later in our discussion because they have piloted a second one after this Cash for Assets program with even more exciting results. So we'll look forward to hearing that, Marc. And Jamie Zimmerman is our author of the case study with us today. And she's an expert on both social cash transfers and on financial inclusion, having set up, for example, the Global Savings and Social Protection Initiative in 2011. So she brings a wealth of experience to this case study and more broadly to the discussion. I do need to say Equity Bank is not able to be with us today, and we're sad about that, but they're with us in spirit, and all of our panelists have worked closely with them, and they are key partners in this initiative. Before we start, I have to remind you that you can ask questions at any time, and we will come back to the questions in the last 15 minutes. So you can see in the session agenda that we're going to look at methodology, then the findings, and then a bit more of the story behind the World Food Programme's journey on their Cash for Assets program. We're going to draw out the lessons and then the next steps that the World Food Programme has taken. And then, as I said, in the last 15 minutes, there will be Q&A, and you can put those questions in any time, and we'll be, if you think, oh, wait a minute, I am not sure what this means, then send us a question, and we'll have it ready to ask when the time comes. We're also going to be having some polls as we go, and this is the first one, so you actually get to do it live, real time. You can see there are 5 options for you to choose one. Select one, actually go to your screen and click on it, and then it will come up. You have 10 more seconds to click on it, and then we'll see the results, and you'll get a sense of who all the other people are around the world. We have people from every region, and we'll soon be able to see what type of organizations everyone's from. So the poll will be closing in 5 seconds, and we will be able to see, it should come up on your screen, where everybody's from. There we go. We have a lot of development partners, no surprise there. Really glad that our friends from the UN, NGOs, and other foundations are with us. And of course, our private sector colleagues who see the benefits of this as well as our development partners. So really glad. So you can see who our audience is, who's with us today. So we'll be doing 3 other polls as we go. So you're obviously expert at doing this, so you won't need much more introduction than that. The Better Than Cash Alliance, for those of you who don't know us, is an alliance of governments and private sector and development organizations who are all committed to a global movement from cash to electronic payments. And the alliance does 3 things, which is advocate for the shift from cash to electronic, provide technical assistance and other forms of assistance to those who are members making the shift, and developing cutting-edge research products. And the case study is an example of the cutting-edge research. And the reason that we're all, such a wide range of people, are working together on this is for 5 benefits that we all see: cost efficiency, transparency, security, particularly for women, financial inclusion, and developing new markets. Starting off with Jamie, who's going to tell us a bit about the context where these Kenya case study fit and how the methodology came together.
Yes, thank you, Ruth, for hosting the discussion today. This is really exciting to be here. So this case study is actually one arm of a larger cross-country comparative study on electronic payments programs, both government-to-person and donor-to-person, or G2P and D2P as we all like to call it. The Bankable Frontier Associates conducted on behalf of CGAP and Better Than Cash Alliance last year. The objective of the larger overall study was to examine and pull out the critical lessons from the experiences of some early movers in designing and implementing electronic payments in more difficult contexts, such as low income and low infrastructure environments. To uncover these untold stories of each program's e-payment experience, we used both a demand and a supply-side research methodology. So beyond myself on the supply side and Christy Bowling of BFA on the demand side, the research team also included David Porteous, Stephen Kidd, Caroline Pulver, and Beatrice Marulanda, all as advisors. These are all global experts on social protection and payments. We conducted 4 case studies on programs in Haiti, Kenya, the Philippines, and Uganda, and all of their stories were fascinating, unique, some of them even juicy, but we found that the Cash for Assets in Kenya study to be particularly interesting. So Cash for Assets is an e-payments initiative led by the World Food Program in partnership with the government of Kenya, reaching food insecure households in 6 arid and semi-arid counties in eastern and coastal Kenya, and it has several really unique components. First of all, it's the only one of our case studies that leapfrogged straight from food aid to electronic payments. Second, in addition to the regular e-payments, it includes resiliency building among the recipients via community assets projects. And third, it has financial inclusion as an explicit core objective and has had that since the program's inception. In fact, the World Food Program worked closely with its payment service provider, Equity Bank, as you mentioned, on both design and implementation of the system. And it's the only one of our case studies that pays recipients directly into a mainstream bank account.
If I understand what you're saying correctly, then you're really saying that this is exceptional in all your experience and in the other set of case studies that you did. The World Food Program's experience here is exceptional for us to listen to.
Yes, absolutely, Ruth. And I think that the main point here is that in the case study itself, what we wanted to do was tell that really interesting and exceptional story of Cash for Assets by bringing in the experiences not only of WFP, but also their NGO partners, Equity Bank, the agents in the field, the government partners, the funders of the pilot, and, of course, also the recipients themselves.
So, of course, what everybody's going to be really excited about is this, the key findings that come from it. So this 15% number that's on the headlines. So tell us more about that 15% more cost efficient than in-kind contribution.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of great findings, a lot of key headlines coming from the case study. But I think that there are 2 really compelling findings that really come out. And the first is that I think people really are interested in seeing is that it is possible to leapfrog from in-kind aid to e-payments without going through that common gradual shift of cash disbursement in an envelope. And even with that leapfrog, second, the early results show that the cost efficiency gains of shifting to electronic payments are promising. So when WFP compared the cost of its in-kind distribution model with its e-payments model, they found that delivering aid in this case through e-payments was approximately 15% more cost efficient.
That's very compelling. And but Cheryl, I'd like to bring you in here because you're the person on the ground. Why does this matter to the World Food Program?
Yeah, sure, Ruth, and thanks tons for inviting WFP to participate today. It's really appreciated, and we're very excited to be here. Okay, so I should explain, our numbers fluctuate. The number of people we reach fluctuate in Kenya depending on the food security situation in the country. So right now, WFP transfers about $16 million annually to about 375,000 beneficiaries under this program. So a 15% cost efficiency means we can assist the same number of people for about $2.5 million less each year if we're giving them cash instead of in-kind food. If you want to look at it from another angle, we can feed about 56,000 more people each year in the program for the same amount of money if we use cash instead of food. So this kind of cost efficiency can make a real difference in humanitarian programs.
Just let me see if I've understood that correctly. This efficiency benefit that you have found in your programs in Kenya, well, in the 2011 pilot, I know you're doing continuous work on this, but this is the public one that we can guarantee, could actually mean that 56,000 more people would benefit, or you would save $2.5 million. I mean, those numbers, for those of us, we saw that majority of us work on foundations in UN and NGO. For those of us who work in this area, for those of us who've been in the food delivery business like I did many, many years ago, this is just really such important news. So thank you. But then, does it actually help the beneficiaries? Do they actually like it? Do they actually want it? How did it? What did you hear from them?
Yeah, Ruth, and thanks for bringing that up, because that's quite frankly more important for all of us. The beneficiaries really prefer cash because they have more choice, they have more control over what they eat, they have more flexibility. Now, that said, their preference is a bit weaker when cash transfers are delayed or when adjustments to the transfer value didn't keep up with rising food prices. Just let me explain that a little more clearly. We calibrate the amount of money we give to households to the cost of buying food in the local markets. And this is important because in Kenya, food prices are quite volatile. For example, they shot up during the pilot period because there was a serious drought in the country at that time. So we adjusted the transfer value, we increased it, but there was some lag, and that meant for a month or so beneficiaries couldn't buy food, couldn't buy as much food as they needed, really. But still, warts and all, beneficiaries overwhelmingly prefer cash to in-kind food.
And I think you also assessed whether they were eating as much as they needed, as much, so compared the delivery of cash versus food, that they were still getting the nutritional value.
That was an important part of the pilot. We monitored their food consumption, we call it. That's basically how much and how often they eat. And we monitored also their coping strategies, because before people reduce the amount of food they're eating, they usually engage in other negative coping strategies like pulling their kids out of school or something like that. And during the pilot stage, there wasn't any difference in the households that received cash or the households that received in-kind food. Both of them were basically eating the same amount and just as often, and they weren't. The cash group didn't have any additional negative coping strategies.
That's good to hear. You know, people are often worried about how people use cash if they're given cash instead of food. So that's really encouraging news, Cheryl. Thank you. I'm just going to ask all of our people listening to the webinar to take another poll before we go into some of the more details from WFP. What phase are you at in your own organization? Are you on this call because you've not yet started, or you're beginning and you want to learn from the World Food Program experience? Is you're on a fast increase, or almost all your payments are electronic, or it doesn't apply to you, you're just interested? So if you could click one of those, and we can see here that, oh, great news, that a lot of people are increasing their use of e-payments and some shifting. So we don't have people who already know a lot having transferred everything. We're people who are in the process and so understand some of the challenges. So that's great news. Thank you. So let's get back to you, Cheryl. When you were starting out, you had a choice in Kenya because of it's a very innovative environment there in terms of e-payments for an effective payment system. How did you make that choice?
Yeah, thanks. True. We had a few choices, not as many as one would think, because in the areas that we operate, there's not a lot of financial services already there. But for Cash for Assets, we originally tried to use Equity Bank's M-Kesho product. It's a product that links a bank account to an M-Pesa account. I think most of you listening will know what M-Pesa is. It's a mobile money, Safaricom's product that's very popular in Kenya. What we were trying to do there was to give beneficiaries the best of both worlds, mobile money and formal financial services in the form of a bank account. But the product really didn't work very well in the low connectivity, low literacy areas where we operate. So we switched instead to just a bank account with a debit card where people could withdraw their money at a village bank agent. And this was possible because Equity was really aggressively expanding their network of agents into the areas where we were working at the time. This meant our beneficiaries didn't have to travel too far to collect their cash. They didn't have to go all the way to the branch, for example. We also went ahead and tested separately M-Pesa in another setting, alone, not integrated with a bank account. And in the end, both products worked better separately on their own than they did when they were in the hybrid M-Kesho.
So can you give us a very quick summary of the advantages and disadvantages that you experienced then?
Yeah, sure. Mobile money we found was a really good solution in Kenya for an emergency response. That's a short-term, quick response to a large number of people. The Know Your Customer requirements are lighter. It's quicker to roll out because, bar none, M-Pesa has the biggest footprint in those remote areas of the country, which is where WFP operates. And there were no adoption issues with M-Pesa. Kenyans know how to use it and they trust it. But M-Pesa is really much more costly. There's transaction fees that are higher. Sometimes we had to give phones to people that didn't have them and so forth. And Safaricom's bulk payment platform is a bit clunky and it didn't give us what we needed by way of approvals and reconciliation, and these are pretty important things for ensuring that transfers go where they're supposed to go. So cards and accounts, on the other hand, can be very inexpensive. They give beneficiaries a good place to save and build a relationship with the bank. The accountability is excellent and transparency for WFP, reconciliation, and so forth. These are things that we need in a large program, and these are things that our beneficiaries need when they graduate from food assistance.
That's certainly really important to know from a World Food Program perspective, because who's getting it really matters. And so it's a new experience for you, wasn't it, having to collect and manage that personal data from an electronic payment system. So can you tell us how you address those challenges?
Yeah, you're right, Ruth. I mean, we did have a number of course corrections along the way. It wasn't just about, finding the right product or the right delivery mechanism. In addition, we had to think our way through a couple of pretty big problems. First of all, about 20% of our beneficiaries didn't have national IDs, and so they couldn't open bank accounts without national IDs. So we had to set up a temporary arrangement. While they were getting their IDs, they nominated alternates who either had accounts or had IDs so could open an account and receive the money on their behalf. But that was a pretty tricky caseload to manage. Luckily, it's reduced over time. Now most of our beneficiaries do have IDs. We also had to retrain our staff. Our staff are very good at delivering food, but they didn't know a lot about delivering cash, and so that was a big effort. And finally, just like our staff, all of our systems in WFP and processes, business processes, they're all geared towards delivering food. So we needed to retool procedures and develop a new information system, all of it, in order to be able to take the pilot to scale. So all this took time. It took about 6 months, and it took a boatload of energy. The shift to cash at this scale, I guess, is the message, is that this doesn't happen with the flip of a switch.
Okay, so therefore we're coming to the results then. So can you summarize for us what the results were for you then from the World Food Program perspective?
Yeah, so in addition to the cost efficiency, which is, being focused on quite a bit, there were a number of other important results. Stronger controls floats to the top of the list, that's for sure. Electronically registering our beneficiaries means that we can deduplicate That means there's no more double dipping, which does happen in programs. Electronic payments means that we can track exactly who has received what cash and when. We even know when they withdraw it. So if they don't, we can find out what the problem is, like have they lost their card or forgotten their PIN. We know our beneficiaries in a way that we didn't know them before. We have their ID numbers, their addresses, even their phone numbers, and we know that what we're giving them is what they want. So as a humanitarian worker, this is very satisfying. One beneficiary told me, for example, when I take money out of my account, I feel like a school teacher. School teachers are considered learned and they're really respected in these communities. So what she was telling me was that she feels proud, she feels dignified. Not sure what that's worth, but it comes along with a program that costs 15% less, so I think everyone's getting a good deal.
I'm sure that many of us on the line feel that our jobs are really worthwhile when we hear clients talking or beneficiaries saying that they feel like school teachers, they feel proud and have dignity, and that's a really great story. But of course, the numbers are what everybody's looking at. So having both of those is really important. And I just for everyone to focus on, you can see the slide here. These are the issues that are benefits for many of people who shift from cash to electronic. The issue of transparency and accountability, the issue of growth of the local economy, new market access, financial inclusion, the benefit for the beneficiaries, as well as, of course, the cost efficiency. So we didn't plan it this way, but it's just really encouraging to see the experience of World Food Programme is one that is echoes many of other members of the Alliance. So before we go on to sort of the lessons for everybody from this World Food Programme experience, yes, we've got a poll up. Great. What for you is the most important reason to shift to electronic payments? Now, obviously there are more, but we've got 5 here. Cost savings, better security and transparency, financial inclusion, the beneficiaries, and the stimulating the local economies and the markets. And here it comes up. Oh, we've got quite even distribution. How interesting. So you can see for yourself there that there's a group in the middle there. Security and transparency, financial inclusion, and beneficiaries are all about approximately a third each. Cost saving and stimulating local economies are important, but not the number one. So that's fascinating. So we'll obviously look for more case studies that address those issues for everybody. So what's the first one you want to go to? Ensuring a strong delivery value chain. What does that mean?
Yes, thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so, what we did within the case study is really try to bring out some just key salient lessons for anyone in the field who's interested in designing and implementing similar sorts of e-payment schemes. So the first lesson here is about a strong delivery value chain. So these G2P and D2P payments programs are, by their nature, technical and complex. There's several links in this delivery value chain, and they require a minimum technical and operational capacity to function really, really well. And even in this well-developed program of Cash for Assets, challenges in both of them resulted in some delays and hurdles during the pilot process for CFA.
So each step of the way, if each step is not sorted out, you're going to have problems. So, and how can partnerships then affect that process?
Yeah, that's right. So lesson number 2 here is investing in partnerships to amplify these efficiency gains. And this is really tied in with lesson number 1. You have to get your partnerships right. This is really key. As aid agencies and NGOs, and in some cases governments, as they're shifting to e-payments, the programs really need to invest in the partnership structures that reinforce that value chain and mitigate the risks within it. That means things like training the local partners on the new processes up front and really knowing what that's going to take, or considering your procurement rules and how those can either strengthen or weaken partnerships, and what you need to do to allow for flexibility as these plans and the implementation of these schemes, they evolve over time in every case.
So clearly, in this case, they had really strong partnerships, and so that was really worthwhile for them, and that applies for others as well. Now, the third one that's coming up says, ensure a predictable flow of funds before committing to scaling up a program. Many of us work in this business. Surely that's blindingly obvious, isn't it? Ensuring that we got the money before we start. Why have you got this here?
Absolutely. Ruth, yes, I giggle, but it does seem blindingly obvious. But actually, in Cash for Assets and all the other programs, issues of predictable flow of funds was one of the most underestimated and unanticipated challenges that were there. All of these donor-to-person programs and even government-to-person programs, payment programs, are subject to resource constraints, to uncertainties around the permanence of funds. You know, as I said, this isn't unique to Cash for Assets among the programs we studied, but it did stand out in the research because of the frequency of the payment delays in Cash for Assets. You know, they were the most disruptive and the most criticized component in our interviews of what is otherwise regarded as a very successful, respected system.
Cheryl, just quickly, you had mentioned this earlier about the delays in payments. Did you want to just make a quick comment about that?
Thanks, Ruth. It really boils down to one thing. WFP is really good at delivering food aid, and we've done that for 30 years. And we're still largely perceived as a food aid agency. So we still receive most of our contributions in kind. So food, actual food in bags. And this really is causing us problems as we try to scale up the use of cash in those areas where it makes sense to use cash instead of in-kind food, like in the Cash for Assets areas.
So if we have any donors who are listening to us who deliver food aid, think about providing funds instead of bags of wheat or whatever you do. So that's clearly a message there, because you'll get a better bang for your buck and you'll have happier beneficiaries in the long run, apart from everything else. So thanks, Cheryl. Jamie, you had number 4, consider adjusting payment frequency for reduced costs. So one of the ways of managing this flow is adjusting payment frequency, right?
Yeah, that's right, Ruth. And this is also about potentially better bang for your buck and also making your beneficiaries more happy. So we often see monthly payment schemes. These are technical, complex, as I said, sometimes hard to manage. We think that it might be helpful to reduce the frequency of payments, not only because they become more reliable, because you're easing the management burden and the processing of payment cycles over time, but it also could reduce the cost of delivering the payments themselves. More interestingly, though, in our conversations with the Cash for Assets recipients who had received, for different reasons, 2 or even 3 payments at once after some delays, that recipients actually reported that they preferred the lump sum payments because these payments allowed them to better manage their funds, smooth their consumption, and even enabled some investments. So that's also potentially a win-win scenario.
Thanks. That is really helpful for people who are in process, as many of us are from the poll we saw. Cheryl, for you, the two-way communication channels with the beneficiary was critically important. Do tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. This is probably the biggest lesson we learned, really, that communication with beneficiaries is key. And by that I mean two-way communication. Before the pilot in 2011, when we were doing our initial feasibility studies and looking at the design of the program, we did, of course, consult with the beneficiaries. We asked them things like what their preference was. Would they prefer cash or vouchers or food? We asked them who controls the food and the cash in the household. Is it men? Is it women? We asked them what they'd spend their cash on if we gave them cash instead of food, and so forth. And these were questions that, how shall I say, the cash skeptics were concerned about, that there wouldn't be good availability in the markets, that the men would take the cash from the women and spend it on things like alcohol and so forth. And we were able to answer those questions. But what we didn't do was to describe to the beneficiaries the potential products that we could use and have sort of a concrete discussion with them about what this would mean in terms of accessing their money and using their transfers. Instead, we talked to the banks about this. But quite frankly, the areas we were moving into and the types and volumes of transfers we were planning to do, these were new territory for the banks too. These were unbanked communities. We were going where no banks had gone before, shall we say. And they had some products they wanted to try out and some ideas about the best way to move into these areas, but it was all pretty much untested. So I think we all would have been better off if we had talked more to the beneficiaries before we started up.
That sounds like very sound advice for all of us. And so finally, Jamie, what's your final conclusion for us?
Final word on the lessons here is that, really one of the most important components, in my view, from the Cash for Assets approach was their test, learn, iterate model. From the very beginning of the program, they started with a plan to pilot, they monitored and evaluated really well, and they adjusted before scaling up. And I think this emphasis on constant learning throughout the shift from in-kind to e-payments was what made the program able to identify and adapt to lessons learned along the way, and ultimately to make it such a model for success and allow it a platform to continue to build and innovate over time.
So that learning process didn't stop at the end of the Cash for Assets project, Cheryl, did it? You decided to go on and learn and take the next step and explore a model that was electronic from beginning to end. So why don't you tell us why WFP tried this out and what you were learning from it?
Yeah, okay, Ruth, it's true. The learning never stops. So as we continue to expand our use of cash, we need also to continue exploring better ways to deliver it. And as I already said, we did test M-Pesa, and we found some advantages there in some contexts. But in general, the card model still offers more to our beneficiaries by linking them into formal financial services. And it offers us more, it offers WFP more potential in terms of cost efficiencies. So we thought if we can improve on that model, all the better. And that's what led us to this most recent pilot. We'll call it the Merti pilot, because we're doing it in a small town in an arid area of the country. The town's called Merti. Here, what we were wanting to look at was one of the key limitations that all of the mechanisms we had tried so far had in common, and that was their reliance on physical cash. So M-Pesa, and this this account card agent model that we were doing with equity, all of them, in the end, beneficiaries have to withdraw and spend physical cash. And this is a pretty big drawback, actually, because physical cash is inconvenient, it's insecure, and it's expensive for everyone, for the banks, for beneficiaries, for retailers. So we put this problem to the card experts at MasterCard, and they got together with Equity Bank to offer us the least expensive, most promising mechanism we've tried yet. We've nicknamed it Cash Lite because it doesn't rely on physical cash. And we've been running this pilot in Merti since August last year, so for a little over 6 months. Beneficiaries can spend their money electronically with their cards at the local shop, just like I do when I go in and buy my groceries with a debit card at Nacromat. So they don't have to withdraw physical cash. There's no liquidity problems at the agents. There's no long lineups, etc. So that's the level of service and choice we actually want for our beneficiaries, and that's quite frankly when the whole e-payment thing starts to make a lot of sense to everyone.
Yes, it's clearly getting cash out of the system. We're totally in support of that. And one of your partners was MasterCard in this, and Marc's with us today. So Marc, does it work for MasterCard, or is it just to make you feel better?
No, this worked very fine for MasterCard, and thank you, Ruth, for having me this opportunity to talk about that and to talk about the partnership that we have with the World Food Program. So in just a minute, at the end of 2012, WFP and MasterCard gathered in this partnership exactly to address some of the concerns that were raised before, to move away from food in kind to local food aid and to, let's say, direct funding. So we got in a partnership to address two main objectives. First of all, we wanted to support WFP with direct consumer funding raised by developing fundraising channels and platforms, and increasing WFP's brand awareness using our MasterCard sales channels. Secondly, we were looking at supporting WFP shifting up to 30% of their activities from food aid to local food access by providing them the payment systems expertise. And that's exactly what we did in Murti. And of course, 30% is a major shift. And we believe that that can be achieved by deploying proven payment solutions at scale, solutions that are based on open industry standards and that are supported by local or regional partners that have an interest to cooperate. So the Murti pilot was all about proving that such a model can be organized, managed, and operated, and with success. So in Equity Bank, WFP found the financial partner that was interested to set up financial services for the people in Murti. They had the capacity to operate an open standard card and POS technology. They were willing to take on a fair share of the organization and operation, and they have the scale to replicate this model nationwide and potentially even regionally in Sub-Sahara. So in terms of the multi-project organization, WFP organized the selection of the beneficiaries and the households as they usually do. They defined the merchant selection criteria in terms of food quality, quantity, and the pipeline. They provided the logistical support, and obviously they ensured that there was sufficient cash flow to fund the accounts. Equity's role was to contract, educate the merchant, and equip them with POS terminals. They provided the households with debit cards, a PIN code, and also financial literacy training. And then they ensured that the household accounts were funded on a monthly basis. So together, WFP and Equity Bank, they explained the payment solution to the household representatives, and they registered the beneficiaries and opened the accounts for them. And so throughout this project, MasterCard was there to assist with payment systems expertise.
So this is an example of the partnerships that Jamie was talking about. Equity Bank, we're really sorry Equity couldn't join us today, was as key because they were the financial service provider on the ground. So thank you for that summary, Marc. So this pilot, have we had any results yet from the pilot, Cheryl?
Yeah, we've had lots of good results, and I think there's a study by FSD that's available, and I think the link has been sent to everyone who's registered on this webinar. But lots of good results. First of all, the beneficiaries, they appreciated immediately how convenient and secure the system was. WFP, we appreciated immediately how inexpensive it was, because once again, every dollar we save just means we can assist more people. And in the end, we have one more tool in our toolkit, and our customers have better service and more choice, and that's really what it's all about.
Did it not meet was there a place where it did not meet your expectations anywhere, Cheryl?
Yeah, well, we'd like to see a little bit better tech out there. We had hoped in this pilot to be testing the MPOS, the mobile POS, it's basically just an inexpensive smartphone with a card reader that pretty much any size of retailer can afford. I guess these haven't been certified in Kenya, or they weren't certified in time. So we were stuck with the bigger, more expensive classic POS that only the large shopkeepers can afford. So the open-air retailers, which is where our beneficiaries prefer to shop, they aren't looped in yet.
So there's still some work to be done. So Marc, what are the next steps for you?
Well, the next steps are exactly what Cheryl was referring to. So plans are being prepared now to expand the Murti model to a larger scale, and this time we will have mobile POS terminals part of the plan to reach even the smaller merchants. It will still be interesting, though, to see whether that model with, let's say, cheaper or terminals will still be reaching the smallest merchants, and if it will meet WFP's expectations. So that's something to look for.
So the recipients have benefited for all these reasons we can see here on the screen, as well as the merchants. And so with some of these issues sorted out, there is a real step for sustainability and scale then. Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
Exactly. And I think that the pilot that we did in Murti was actually providing everything that WFP was looking for. both in terms of cost efficiencies, also because it provided that transparency, so making sure that the people could use the funds, but they could use them in the stores that had been selected to sell food and nothing else. And maybe something that it may be a detail, but what was interesting for us as well is the model in Murty was based on debit cards with a PIN code, and the model in Murty proved that the PIN code was really workable for the recipients. So that was something very interesting to learn for us.
Great. So Cheryl, Marc, Jamie, I'm going to ask you for your key, succinct recommendation before we go to the Q&A session. So Cheryl, I can see here you've got to design a client-centric payment system.
I know, and Ruth, I've said it already 5 times, or in 5 different ways anyhow, but it's worth repeating. Spend lots of time communicating with the beneficiaries. We did this in Murty, and it really paid off. They have important insights, and how well they understand the program that you're trying to implement, it can make or break a new program. And there are key partners in this shift, and we really need them on board every step of the way.
Okay, Marc, you're up next.
Very short. My recommendation is do not start experimenting. Just leverage existing proven and open payment system models, technologies, and standards, and leverage the interest of cooperation with local and regional partners that are transparent and regulated.
Full marks for being succinct. Good on you. Jamie, what's your key recommendation?
My key recommendation is if financial inclusion is one of your goals, if it is an objective, then you need to incorporate it into your payment scheme design and plans from the very beginning, even if the outcome will take some time to achieve. While financially inclusive payment systems may not be feasible everywhere, and I know that, the case study shows how account link transfers provide recipients not only with an opportunity for financial inclusion, but also dignity, choice, and resiliency over time, which are so valuable.
I have good news for you. Our colleague from Equity Bank has managed to get online. Hooray. John, are you with us? And you want to answer a question about the value proposition for Equity Bank.
I think Jamie's last comment sums it up for us. As a bank, we're fairly focused on financial inclusion, and that has both a corporate social responsibility aspect to it, but obviously it needs to be economically viable if it's going to be long-term and sustainable. So as a bank, we have always looked at trying to digitize verticals. The bank started off by digitizing the coffee and tea industry, or helping to digitize the coffee and tea industry in Kenya. And we've been very successful in that, and it has obviously proved to be a sustainable model. So we wanting to broaden our outlook, and we've been looking at, well, how do we get into the FMCG space? And
okay. Just to tell us what FM, whatever it is, for people who don't understand that. Can you just summarize?
Sorry, fast-moving consumer goods.
Okay, so your partnership with WFP helped you in that?
Absolutely. So we need to start looking at low-value retail transactions, which are performed by the majority market. And poor people form the bulk of that market, the bottom of the pyramid. So if you have a look at a low-value transaction on its own, it does not make economic sense. But by us reducing the cost of disbursements for governments and donors, we believe we can extract value out of that, which basically puts the oil in the cogs to get the whole system moving. And once you can get the cogs moving, it actually, value can be extracted from higher up in the vertical. So it's a long-term play by the bank, but we believe, and we think we have proved it over time, that if you can digitize a whole vertical, it makes huge sense. So that's exactly what we're trying to do.
John, thank you so much. I think that there are many of our humanitarian and other, who's the majority on the line, would be really encouraged to hear both you and MasterCard saying that this makes sense for you if you take a long-term perspective of where the market's going. So thank you so much. There's a key question, Cheryl, that several people have asked us about calculating that 15% number. How did you calculate it? Where does that number come from?
Yeah, Ruth, I can see why people would ask that, but we spent quite a bit of time on this. We did the study over 7 months, and we included all of the costs for WFP of delivering food aid in kind, and we compared them to all of the costs of delivering the same amount of assistance to the same beneficiaries in the same areas, but using electronic payments. And we didn't include startup costs. I think people have asked about that. We didn't include startup costs because, quite frankly, that those are one-off things, and we couldn't possibly include them for the food aid. So we didn't include them either for the electronic payments. But for everyone to remember, really, that WFP is really quite efficient at delivering in-kind food aid. We've done it for 30 years. Our costs of delivery are really low. So the fact that we're seeing cost efficiency by switching to cash means that these markets were ready for us to make that transition.
Great. So you were making sure that you were comparing apples and apples in this analysis, and I believe there's a reference to the WFP evaluation that you did in the longer version of the case study. So another question that has come in is about women. Now, you mentioned women were key beneficiaries, and in the highlights that are on our website, it says 85% were beneficiaries. How does this benefit women? Does electronic payments, are they good for women? Cheryl.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, but just to clarify, WFP in general, we aim to put food in the hands of women. So already before, when these beneficiaries were receiving in-kind food assistance, that food was going to the woman head of household in as many cases as made sense and as much as possible. So we're basically just doing the same thing with cash. But the great thing is that more women now have IDs because they've seen the need for getting IDs, and they go out and get them. Women have bank accounts, so they're linked into formal financial services. So this is empowering.
Great, and we have lots of questions on financial inclusion. I think this is a question for you, Jamie. So you said you've got to consider it at the beginning, but what can you give us specific things that people should do?
Yeah, it's right. I mean, you obviously have to work with what you've got. The infrastructure that you are dealing with, has certain limitations, but financially inclusive design is not impossible even in low infrastructure contexts, as this and the other case studies show. I think that one of the important parts is planning for the future, working with what you've got now, but planning for the future, envisioning the ecosystem, the payment infrastructure, how you can make financially inclusive payments in the future. And I think with the right partners and with good design that creates exposure, that it enables confidence and trust among the beneficiaries, you're going to find that your scheme may be actually a driver of financial inclusion, both on the demand and the supply side. So it's not impossible, even if it's hard.
So it may not be easy, but there's ways to figure it out, especially if you have the right partners, and you can actually be a driver. Now, as we noted that there were several people, the majority of people on the line are from development partners, and several people have asked about the staff training aspects of it, because if you're delivering humanitarian aid, moving to electronic payments is quite a significant shift for your staff. So what were the key themes to success in training staff, and then I suppose also recipients in the use of payments, Cheryl? What nuggets can you share with us today?
Yeah, well, I think a large part of making the shift for the staff was learning by doing. So we started small. Everyone got hands-on experience. They understood what the problems were. They saw us, doing course corrections. They were part of developing the new systems and the new procedures that they were going to have to use. And then once everything was a bit tested and we'd hit a bit of a steady state, then and only then did we scale up. So I think that was critical. For the beneficiaries, Equity Bank rolled out financial literacy training to all of the beneficiaries. This is a huge effort, but it really made a lot of sense. Most of these people hadn't had bank accounts before. They hadn't had a card before. They weren't sure how to use a PIN and so forth. So that and the training also gave some basics on household economy, how to budget and save for the future, and so forth. So that I think was very important as well.
Great. I'm sure that lots of people will be interested in hearing more about this. I do want to note that the highlights from the case study are on the Better Than Cash Alliance website, and the longer version is on the CGAP, CGAP.org website. And there's a blog that's just been posted. It was raised earlier on the MRTI pilot project that references the results that Cheryl talked about earlier from the MRTI pilot project. So there's a question about the MRTI pilot for you, Marc. How can you really say it's sustainable when you only have, 300, you said, or so households? Can you tell us how it's going to work for you with that small number in the pilot?
Yeah, well, the small number was just there to make sure that it was easily to be organized, but it's sustainable because the financials of the model are such that this works for WFP, because obviously we're looking for cost efficiencies, but this also works for equity. As John was explaining, this needs to be a commercially viable environment. So basically, that's why such a model is sustainable, because it is like there is a win-win in the setting up of such a model in terms of the efforts, the costs, and therefore this is scalable nationwide.
Okay, and you know you're going to get this question about whether the merchants had to pay you commissions on the cards. How did that relationship work?
They did not have to pay MasterCard, but this was the normal standard financials of such a business model where the merchant pays a commission. How does this work? Well, don't forget that before the pilot, the food was coming in from with WFP from elsewhere. In this case, these merchants were bringing that business into MRTI so they could benefit from the business, and this is how that model was working.
Excellent point. So for the merchants, their business was increasing significantly, so that any of the costs were minimal compared to the benefit that they were coming from. This is where the local market development is key, of building resilience. I think one of the points that came from the study the blog that's on the website that highlights the study was talking about the local market development as being incredibly beneficial in the MRTI case as well. So thank you for that. So finally, the issue of trust has come in. So in your actual Cash for Assets program, the original program, Cheryl, how did, when people were having cash coming out, you said that recipient taking cash out, which you said was a problem, but you said recipient training was key. So you had to trust your recipients to use the money in the way that had been agreed. How did you deal with that trust issue as a final question here?
Well, and that is a good question, and that's one that's often asked. When we're shifting from in-kind to using cash, because people cash can be used for anything, But to be honest, when someone's hungry, they usually use their cash to buy food first. And we did a lot of discussion with the beneficiaries about this in advance. What would they use their money for? They reassured us that food was their number one priority. That's why they're a WFP beneficiary. And then we monitor. A statistically representative sample of all of our beneficiaries in terms of food consumption and expenditure patterns. And indeed, that monitoring did indicate that people were primarily buying food with the cash.
And I suppose that's why having I think you called it a locked card in your learning for the second type of project in MRTI, it locked it so that people didn't have to take cash out. They would just kept the money on the card and spent it as they needed it, and you didn't have that problem. So I can see why, from your perspective, it makes a lot of sense going to an end-to-end electronic one where you lock the card for the purposes designed.
I'm not sure that's necessarily a huge advantage. I think in some scenarios it may be. It was the beneficiaries actually that told us they appreciated having their card locked.
Thank you.
They found it was easier to be disciplined about their purchasing, and I think probably that would resonate with most of us, wouldn't it?
Yes, I'm sure that would, and that's a good place to end. It's 10:30, and we're going to call it a day here at the Better Than Cash Alliance. I would like to thank our panelists hugely for your time and effort to put this in. Cheryl, Marc, Jamie, and John coming in at the end there. Thank you very much. To all of you who are participating, thank you for being part of this very exciting initiative and working with World Food Programme. And we look forward to your analysis, your next stage analysis. And Cheryl, so maybe we'll have a next one. And for those of you, if you have ideas for case studies or things that we can share on webinars, please don't hesitate to let us know. And any of the documents you can find at betterthancash.org. With that, wish you all a very good day.